Shouldn't you be trying to kill me?
Yes, I'm building anticipation.
Hello and welcome to Eurogamer. We find ourselves at the start of a new era for Apex Legends with the launch of Shockwave, which kicks off Season 22 with a load of new tweaks, features and game modes designed to revitalise and re-energise the game, and with a particular focus on tempting lapsed players back into the fold. I happen to be joined by one today, Aaron from Push Square. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Jim. Thanks for having me.
It's all right. Welcome to Eurogamer. I believe this is your Eurogamer debut. Is that right?
World premiere,
yeah,
right here in Eurogamer.
Congratulations. Yeah. I mean, they'd let anyone on here these days, to be honest. I'm evidence of that. With Apex Legends, I gather you've got hundreds of hours logged in the game.
Yes, I am just a slightest bit shy of 500 hours on this game across, of course, the PlayStation 4 and 5 version, without me being a console boy. But yeah, big fan of this game. We
were chatting earlier, so you've had like a bit of a break from it. Quite unintentionally, though. You just sort of took a break and then didn't really go back.
Yeah, well, you know how it is when you're in these jobs, there's lots of games coming out, and
this is it.
I played Apex almost daily for about 6 or 7 seasons, and there was just a point where there was games coming out. I fancied trying them out, and I thought, let's take a wee break from Apex, and it was intended to be like a week, 2 weeks, maybe 3. And somehow that has turned into 2 full years where I have not played this game.
So, I mean, with the best will in the world, every big game like this has lapsed players because people just generally find it hard to sustain playing the same game daily for that length of time. But in order to address that, they're coming back with this new season. There's a bunch of stuff in there designed to tempt people like you back into it. The first thing we want to talk about is the new E-District map, which is like a neon cityscape. It's kind of designed to rival Tokyo at night, which I think is quite cool. So it's like an urban warfare thing.
The new map is very interesting from like a layout perspective. It looks very like packed and dense and quite tight, which is quite exciting because a few of the maps from previous Apex seasons have been quite expansive in areas and then tighter, and so this looks very, very tight, and I was especially excited for the skyscrapers. I love games with verticality, and considering Apex doesn't have fall damage as well, you can get some really cool moments where you're just diving from the highest point, escaping from another squad. So yeah, I mean, in aesthetically, obviously you're going for the slick neon sci-fi look, which I'm a sucker for. I do like that stuff. So I think tactically this is going to be quite a different map, especially since you're really going to have to head in a swivel. You know, teams could come from any direction, and it's not so much about keeping an eye on the distance and be like, oh well, is there maybe teams over there? We don't want to go out in the open. Anywhere you could turn around and then there's another team, and that's quite exciting, I think.
Taking with the theme of revitalising, so you can now dual wield the P2020 and the Mozambique, the much maligned Mozambique. The idea is that people can use those, that they're a lot more useful in the late game as well.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, these two weapons, especially from when I was playing, they're the ones that you would quite often happen across in the early game. You know, you're dropping into a hot zone, you've got teams all around you, and you're thinking, right, I'm really hoping that the loot gods are on your side, and you come across like some cool weapon, some powerful weapon, and then you land with a Mozambique or a P2020. Now, those guns on their own can be quite powerful if you know how to use them correctly. Yeah. But 2 of them, you know, that's going to be a different thing. And I think especially, I think in the early game it's going to be really interesting if you're coming across those, and especially considering that the upgrades as well that you find across the map, those are going to carry across both weapons. And it's interesting to think that there's potential there for the late game. I think especially as the final circle, you know, it gets a lot tighter. Having dual wielding shotguns pretty much could be quite a handy thing to have. So I think it's going to be something like a new consideration for players now.
We've got free revivals coming in as well as a feature designed to kind of take the pressure off people. So like it doesn't stop you, like if you're not quite the skill level you want to be, it doesn't stop. It's not like easy mode, but it does mean that you can get back into the action quickly. People who are, you know, actually good at the game aren't sort of, you know, aren't at a disadvantage. So it's a really nice way of leveling the playing field there. means essentially, as I understand it, if you're rubbish, you still have a good time, and if you're good, you're still having a good time. So, which is what this kind of game needs when it's been going for this long, right?
Yeah, I think the really interesting part of the new revivals, because this is something that's never been, I've never played a game like this feature in the game, and having, I suppose, quite often when you're playing with a team and one of you die or two of you die, quite often the game can become about bringing you back. So it's all about getting the revival banners, getting to the beacon to bring in your players, and that can become like the main goal of the game rather than, you know, winning it. I suppose it's more about that survival, and there'll be aspects of that still, I think, with this, but I think it allows there to be, you know, the people that are still alive are still having the fun where they can still go about and explore and try and avoid or attack different teams. But then there's just that case of you're not just sitting there watching them the whole time. If one person in your squad is still there and they manage to survive long enough, you're going to come back into the game. And I think that's going to have a real difference for the teams that maybe you have someone that isn't as good or someone that's a little better, or even just someone that got unlucky, you know. Now you have the potential where you can just, if your team is smart and they don't just run into danger or something, then you could come back fairly quickly, which I think is a cool feature.
Yeah, so it's a boon basically if you've got someone like me on your team who needs constant babysitting.
You gotta let Jim play the game still, you know, he's not just gonna be watching you.
Oh no, tell Jim we're doing it on a different day. Just keeping with the theme of assists, we've now got battle sense. You can see health bars on enemies. You can get, there's highlights now when you have a proper line of sight, so there's less sort of confusion there, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a lot into readability really for players. I know that they're not including the highlights for people way in the distance. You know, you're still going to have to keep an eye out for people like that. But when just you're, especially with this new map being quite densely packed, if you're having the players all around, there's just that slightly highlight there as opposed to just help you go, oh, there they are, whatever. And the health bar is quite it's going to be a real impact to the tactics, I think, because there's obviously these games everyone knows you got the guy screaming, oh, he's one shot, but now you kind of know, so there's like actually an element of, do you push for that and like actually try to take them down? But of course there's still balancing aspects to this where if you break the line of sight, you can't see the health bar, so maybe they're healing at this point. And I think it's quite a smart inclusion when combining it with the revival mode as well, because then it's a case of you're reading the health bars and it's, do I push for that? But if I leave them, maybe they survive long enough to bring other teammates back. So it's going to be interesting in the moment-to-moment gameplay, and I think all of us will have to sort of fight that urge to, you know, not push yourself to expose yourself because you're like, oh, he's just got that tiny wee bit of health left, maybe I should, and then the whole team dies, you know. So it's going to be an interesting balancing act, and I think for sure it's going to mix up gameplay when it's in those like tight skirmishes.
That is really interesting how something like that changes the game and gives it a more of a, almost like a bit of a sort of poker aspect, I guess. You know?
Yeah. just for something that seems so simple and like synonymous with video games as well as health bars, and then to bring that in and it's like actually trickling down into the gameplay experience, I think that's quite cool. And I think it highlights sort of the complexity to and the dynamism, I suppose, to the gameplay in Apex as well, which is like one of the most fun shooters out there. So then to add that in where you're having like another wee element to think about, that's quite cool. Yeah,
and it's like kind of, I suppose when you're down on health and you're the only person on your team who's down on health and you become a target, and it's like people smell blood in the water, especially if you're in that urban environment as well. You know, you're in the district. It's gonna feel like Predator 2, right? That's what it boils down to. So I mean, that sounds incredible. Lastly, we want to talk about Bot Royale.
Yes.
Which is a battle royale experience with obviously a player squad and bot controlled squads, and there's people who want a bit of shooting practice or people who want to play the game when there isn't necessarily people to play with. So again, that's another thing that is going to help ease people into this, because as we were saying, when an online game gets to this sort of level of popularity, and when it's been going for this long, it can be intimidating for new players to come in, because you have this sort of two-tier, like, where you got the people who are just like, you know, this is basically reality for them and they're constantly jacked into it, and then you got people who are just like, well, you know, what do the buttons do? So again, this is another way that people can get up to speed without necessarily, you know, humiliating themselves.
I think it's always important for a game that's been going on for as long as Apex has to have something for newer players, because it's like you're saying, there's a lot of skill and like knowledge-based aspects in the gameplay for something like Apex. It's something that Respawn has always done really, really well. And obviously that can create a divide in some spaces, but something like this is like a way for them to maybe learn the ropes of how the general battle royale feel works, the layout of the maps, how you can flank certain different ways, because there's a lot of that down to knowledge of the map terrain. Apex is one of those games though where I know people actually do use the gun range to test out the different weapons, get a good feel for them and how much damage they're doing. So then to expand that to like the actual mode itself, where you're not just testing your guns, you're testing map knowledge, you're testing skirmishes with actual AI bots, you know, there's going to be a lot of knowledge there for people, and I think it's a good opportunity if maybe you're trying to introduce your friends to the game, maybe you can come in and play the bot royale with them. And I think that's going to be quite key to bringing new players into the game, because we know these live service games, they can be quite tough to break into if you miss that initial wave. So having this here where it's, you know, it's easing you into the process, and that can only really be a good thing for new players. Yeah,
absolutely. Which, you know, and which keeps the player base healthy generally. So it's a good thing for everyone, really. So I think, you know, as somebody who's perhaps never tried Apex before, or as a lapsed player like yourself, somebody, you might be getting a bit of FOMO. But you know, there's no reason to be sort of intimidated. There are tools here to help ease you back into it.
Totally.
So as someone who hasn't logged in for a couple of years, how are you feeling about the new season kicking off, and are you tempted to jump back into it?
Well, I was actually just messaging my old squad today to talk about getting back into things. No, it's exciting. It's exciting. I mean, the map itself is something that certainly piqued my interest, and obviously seeing these little changes like the health bars and the highlights, and then there's not just that, but of course, having been a player that's not played it for a while, I've got 2 years of cool changes to experience as well, like new maps and new legends. So it's not necessarily even just this season alone, it's the stuff that's come before it, because it is an evolving game, it's constantly improving, and that's like exciting in itself. So there's so many new things to discover, but in terms of what we're getting this season, it looks quite cool, and I love it when a game, you can sense the optimism, the enthusiasm, you know, there in the development. You know that, like, let's get hyped up on Apex, and I'm kind of feeling that when I'm looking into this new season, so it's got me quite hyped to dive back in for the first time after this mightily long break of mine that just did not mean to be this long, but here we go. I'm hyped to get back into it.
So if you're a lapsed player and this has tempted you back in, let us know in the comments. Or are you someone who hasn't ever taken the plunge, and the new map, etc., has convinced you to? Again, let us know. I'm going to let Aaron get back to push square now, because I think we've taken up quite enough of your time. You want to get back to shooting people, right?
Yeah, I do.
So thanks very much, Aaron, and we'll speak to you later.
Thanks.